Brother, do you know how much leadership influence you actually have with your wife and kids? You might think that you're leading well, but here's the reality. Most guys are way more average than they think. In this episode, if you're ready to set the foundation to go from happily married to ecstatically married, then listen up. We got a good one for you. Welcome to the Family Captain Podcast. I'm your host, I'm your coach, John Michael Clark. On this show, we help Christian husbands grow in family leadership and sex and marriage. So if you believe that Jesus is king and you want to lead your family with strength and love and you want frequency and freedom in your sex life, then you're in the right place. We're going to help you build an incredible family culture where God is glorified and your family is blessed by your strong, loving leadership.
Brothers, welcome to The Family Captain. This show is designed to help you become the greatest man your wife and kids have ever known. I'm your host, Chris Farrell, and look, my job's simple. I get to sit here, I get to ask the right questions to the man himself, and pull every ounce of wisdom out of this guy. John Michael Clark, family leadership, sex and marriage expert. My man, what is up?
What's up? I think we all have an easy job. Podcasters just sitting around talking to each other. So I think it's pretty simple for all of us, and hopefully the guys will be blessed by it, or at a minimum entertained.
Yeah, man, absolutely, dude. This is a topic that I don't think a lot of guys are going to touch. A lot of family leadership experts are going to touch, and based on the title of this episode, a lot of guys are going to be like, "Okay, leadership capital. What is this?" And so, before we even get into the details of how guys are burning leadership capital, let's set the foundation here. What exactly is leadership capital, and why does it matter for a husband and a father?
You can think about leadership capital the same way you think about money in the bank. You got so much money, and that means you can make certain purchases. There's some things you can buy, there's some things you can't buy. Maybe you got enough to buy a private island, maybe you got enough to buy a pack of gum. It all depends on how much capital, finances, money, cash you have in the bank. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about leadership capital. How much influence do you have with any particular person? So I've got a limited amount of leadership capital with you guys, you podcast listeners. Like there's a certain degree of trust, but it's only a certain degree. Depending on how long you've been following me or the Family Captain, maybe it's more, maybe it's less. And you can always assess any given relationship, maybe not down to the dollar, but you can understand the concept. Do I have a lot of influence with this person? Am I kind of in a neutral place? Or actually, am I in the hole? Am I negative and I have no influence with this person whatsoever?
Yeah, man. And I feel like we can apply that to a lot of areas in our lives. But in particular, this is an important one, right? So most guys never check their balance, though. So they don't realize when they're running on empty until their wife stops trusting their leadership or their kids stop listening, all the things. But how can a guy check his balance and see if he's actually leading well at home?
Yeah, well, the ultimate test is, like, for example, for your wife, it's to give her a directive. That's what I tell guys. It's like, oh, I think I've got a lot of leadership capital. Well, what could you say, and your wife respond to and say, of course, yes. And like, that's the ultimate test. Instead of what do you feel? How much leadership do you believe you should have? How much do you wish you had? How much do you think these other things should have counted for? You focused on this one thing for years, neglected a bunch of others, but said that should give me a ton of leadership capital. The fruit is always talking to you. So the fruit of your relationships is always going to give you the feedback, but that's how you can test it. Give an instruction, give a directive, give an expectation, set a standard, and the response that's coming to that is indicative of whether or not you got just loads of cash, just an irrelevant amount of money stacked in the bank in this relationship, or you're somewhere around neutral where it's like, you better make a smaller purchase so you don't overdraft, or you're negative and you try and say, hey, here's a standard, here's an expectation, here's a directive, here's an instruction. And your wife looks at you like, really? Like, who do you think you are? So that's an indicator of how much capital you've got.
Yeah, man. So I feel like there's a lot of objections probably to people listening to that. There could be guys who are like, okay, yeah, but my wife gives me directives all the time. Are you saying that's a bad thing?
Okay, well, first of all, yes. That's a completely different subject. If your wife is giving you directives and leadership, we want zero. Guys aren't ready for this one, Chris. We want 0.0% leadership, instruction, and direction from our wives. Are you sure? Did you mean to say something else? Or do you mean to give the generalization example like you usually do, John Michael? No, actually, I don't in this case. I want 0.0% leadership and direction from Natalie. Now, this episode isn't about submission and headship and polarity and how to teach her how to communicate in a submissive and respectful way while still being a godly and capable and wise first officer. So I'm not going to tease all that out right now. But yeah, to answer that question, no, we don't want her leadership and direction and directives. We want her help and we want her perspectives, but there's a particular way that all that needs to happen. So yeah, we need to be the one who's bringing direction, instruction, standards, leadership, in a word.
Yeah. So it's clear based on what you're saying that there's a foundation behind the reactions to these things. And I get that. But I know guys are probably like, okay, hold up. If my wife's like, hey, could you take out the trash? Is that an example of a directive? Like, what's the difference? Help me understand.
So any time a wife is communicating direction to her husband, then that's the kind of thing that there would probably be a more submissive and more respectful way for her to communicate. This is a different subject entirely from me building leadership capital with her. This is her trying to bring leadership to me. So the difference, though, if I was coaching a wife who is like, I am humble and submissive in my heart, but I don't know how to apply it, just like what we answer here in the Family Captain for guys. I love my wife. Could you help me with the practicals? Absolutely, bro. We got you covered. So a lot of people are about to lose their minds as I tease out this example. I'm not afraid of that. I'm just trying to give that to them as a little bit of a brace yourself, prepare yourself, soften your heart instead of like being eager to fight or fight. It's really good for the algorithm. So like tear me up in the
It
comments
is
and
kind of good for the
please
algorithm.
get me viral with some Christian feminists. Like I really appreciate it. But no, sincerely, I really want for a woman who's watching and she's like, "What? I'm never supposed to tell my husband to take out the trash." Did you just ask it the way I just said it? Because that would have been a little bit ugly. The point is a submissive heart, which Scripture commands wives to be submissive to their husbands. In what? In some things? Sometimes? If he says we're moving to Arizona, do you have to do it? No, be submissive to your husbands in everything. So the New Testament commands for wives are like embarrassingly on the nose, as they say, when it comes to respect, submit, respect, submit, respect, submit. They're not bad, but they're very plain. So for the wife who already has that heart, if she is saying, Joe Michael, could you please just give me something practical? Here you go, sister. Here's something practical. Not a law, but a practical outworking of what would a submissive heart look like. Why are you prepping it so much? Because I'm trying to help people's brains from exploding before I say it. So instead of, honey, I need you to take out the trash, the simple thing you would do is you submit the problem, you defer the problem up to your husband, and you say, honey, the trash is full, and I'm in the middle of dinner and I can't get anything else in it. That's it.
Yeah.
So I can never. Well, already your anger is revealing like the lack of respect and submission. Why do I have to do it that way? Well, I didn't say you have to. One thing I will say you have to do is you have to submit to your husband. You have to respect him. So one of the things that guys are going to find, and plenty of men are mad right now too. But one of the things that guys find, Chris, is the more masculine you become and the less emasculated you are and the more polarity that builds in your marriage, the more these kinds of things matter. So 1.0 husband hears that example and he's like, are you kidding me? Good grief. Good grief. Oh my goodness. The fragile male ego of this guy. And husband 2.0 is like, I don't think I need that, but I can see it. And husband 3.0 is like, yeah, of course. Yeah, like, yeah. He feels and notices that irritation. Why? Because they've got the chronic stuff out of the way. There's not like deep brokenness and unforgiveness and bitterness and just all the crap that most people deal with in their marriages and they think is normal. They think it's normal. They think this is a normal Christian marriage. It's pretty healthy. You and I define health differently, friend. I don't say it to condemn you. I just say, I don't want what you call awesome. I don't want what you call awesome either. Fair enough. But what I'm doing is I'm trying to make things practical for people. And I've never met a Christian wife, Chris. I've never met a Christian woman who's like really, really good about teaching submission to women and actually making it plain. It's always just this, be submissive, be respectful. But everybody has in their head, that means if he says we got to move to Arizona, then you got to move to Arizona. You can be kind of grumpy about it, you can be mean about it, but you got to go because Jesus. Instead of, actually having a humble and submissive heart that says, I defer these things up to you. So driving down the road, you don't turn to your husband and say, slow down. Why? That's disrespectful. I don't think that's disrespectful, spoken like a woman. But a masculine man feels the irritation and the disrespect there. An emasculated man who you've been doing that to for 15 years, so you go grab your husband, have him listen to this episode, and he goes, I think that guy's totally wrong, dear. Consider the source. And also ask yourself, do you really respect and admire that man? Or could it be a little bit of cowardice on his part? So we're kind of all over the place right now. We still
No,
we
no,
stepped,
no, no, no. We are not. We are not.
we stepped away from leadership capital. How much capital do I have? And I'm talking
We're
about
getting there.
submission.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have to do a whole episode on this now because it's gonna
Oh, we'll definitely do a whole
it
episode
needs
on this.
clarity, but it is pretty simple. Hey sister, do you love the Lord? Yes. Do you love your husband? Do you want to respect and submit to your husband? Well, why do you use that word? I'm so far past dancing around the S word from the Bible. I'm not sorry for it, and I won't I won't, spend an hour making you feel better about it. It's good news for you. It's not bad news. Now, would you like to obey the scriptures? Yes. Here's a simple tool that I can help you to learn how to do that. Every time Natalie teaches women, she says literally, just like I teach men, this is a different subject, but I say literally, never ask your wife for sex ever again for the rest of your life. And instead, we teach men how to initiate. Natalie teaches women literally never tell your husband what to do ever again for the rest of your life. What am I supposed to? You're supposed to submit and defer. Well, what if he doesn't? Welcome to submission. Like, oh, you mean like actually submit? Yeah. It's crazy, right? It actually looks like something. Just like we wouldn't let a husband get away with saying, oh, I love my wife. What's that look like, Bill? I love her in my heart. Yeah. And there's got to be some outworkings of that. That's got to have some skin on it somewhere, right, Bill? I love her in my heart. And that's nonsense. Like, we would all, like, rebuke that guy. We're like, dude, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Love has to look like something. So the Christian woman who says, who says I respect and submit to my husband, I say, praise the Lord, sister. What does that look like, Becky? She's like, well, I just do it. And then you start to give examples, and that's when people get really mad. I think I ought to be able to. I'm like, fine, fair enough. Enjoy what you got. I hope y'all's fruit is fantastic and incredible. I know it's not. You can pretend it is, but I've been around for a minute. I've done this a lot, and I know it gets sweeter. It's win-win, by the way. That's Becky's resistance. She thinks it's win-lose. That's the whole problem. Like I said before, the giant female ego gets in the way. She thinks that submission has to do with value and worth. And it doesn't. Everybody, we have equal value, we have equal worth, but that's not the same thing as rank. That's not the same thing as equal authority. Yeah. And people can't distinguish those things. So, dude, that's some stuff about submission. All that was for free.
Hey, man, I think that's good. So, I hear that, and I didn't know what you were going to say. I hear that, and I'm like, that feels right. It feels right for my wife to defer the problem to me. The other part of my brain's like, is that her beating around the bush a little bit? But then
let me speak to that, because that's a great point. Mm-hmm. Because for years we have all worked to masculinize our wives. We worked to masculinize her. So early in the relationship, if she was feminine, what do you mean by feminine? I mean submissive. What do you mean by submissive? I mean deferring problems up to you. Most of us trained that out of her, and she was like, I'm cold. And we're like, do you want me to get you a blanket? Do you want me to mess with the thermostat? Just say what you mean, bro. And we treated her like a dude because we didn't realize what was happening, and we did not like the responsibility that she was putting onto us. We did not like the fact that she was actually deferring to us, and it put us in the leadership position where we actually get to give the gift of our provision. But because we were emasculated, we weren't masculine men. I wasn't. Let me just speak for me. I was not a masculine man. And I wasn't limp-wristed or anything like that, but just as we measure masculinity when it comes to responsibility, then I wasn't a masculine man, because Natalie, when we were younger, used to defer things automatically. And I'd be like, say what you want. Say what you mean what you say. Well, congratulations, Sean Michael. You're continuing to treat your wife like a dude. You're continuing to masculinize her. And then years go by, and your wife is now your sparring partner. And you're going like, what happened to the soft girl I used to love? Well, you turned her into a man. You made her masculine. And every time she behaved in a feminine way, you didn't like the responsibility that it implied for you. So you told her, hey, speak and give clear instruction, because we're 50-50 partners around here. And so she began to do that. She didn't like the way it felt, but she couldn't like articulate it because feminism, right? Like we're equal. Everything must be the same. So the feminine in her is being crushed. She's coming closer to the middle of androgyny. You're coming closer to the middle. And now we're just life partners. 15 years of that. And it was like, we hardly ever have sex. And she's just not soft anymore. Like, yep. Custom built, man. Like the system perfectly produced the thing that it was designed to do. Like,
Yeah.
welcome to 15 years of bad behavior. And now you hear about polarity and you hear about submission and you both lose your minds and you're like, that's crazy. It's actually super sweet and wonderful because she gets
Yeah.
to go, hey, I'm concerned about this thing. And you go, now I get to give the gift of my leadership. Whereas in the past, whenever she would give instruction, I am obeying. My options were to obey mommy's instruction or disobey mommy's instruction. But that was it. Now, Natalie says, hey, baby, I'm sharing something with the captain. And now the masculine man gets to go, I get to provide for her. So if she says, I'm cold, I got multiple options. I get to give the gift of leadership. The difference is I used to have it extracted from me. Now when she says I'm cold, I get to go bum ba bum and I put on my cape and I get to provide for her. I love to provide for her. Now many wives don't share vulnerably because they know that their husband is not actually joyfully providing for her. But the point is that you're always going to provide leadership. You're always going to provide solution. Now you might be in the middle of something. She might say I'm cold and you go, yeah, baby, go ahead and bump up the thermostat. Ladies, this is not a clever way to get him to be manipulated. It's true submission. It's just putting some flesh on it. So, but whenever she says, hey, can you go bump up the thermostat? Well, now it's being extracted from me. Now the thing is being taken from me. I didn't really have a voice. I didn't really have a say. My only option is to say no. And now she's like, you're mean. You're a jerk. But the more she shares femininely and submissively and goes, here's a thing. Here's a concern. Are we getting in bed for the night? And Natalie goes, I don't have any water. and I go, I'll save the day. Like we do it jokingly now because sometimes she will ironically say it, like knowing. And there are
Yeah.
times where I'm like, I might be settled in, I'm reading my book, and I go, refrigerator's downstairs, beautiful. Like, oh my goodness, yeah. It's happened, people. Like, because to my sisters, that's the point. It's not your clever way to get everything you want out of your husband. You could start to use that as a manipulative tactic. If he's a masculine man, you'll start to see that he loves to provide. He loves to give because I love to give to my wife. I love to please my wife. I don't live to please my wife. So anyway, we should get back around to leadership
Bro,
capital at
that
some
was
point.
so good, though. That was so good. And that was very useful for guys to hear. And I think it gets a lot of guys who have good marriages a lot to think about. Because what I'm thinking there, and this perfectly segues us into this episode, when it comes to leadership capital and ways that men erode it. Okay. So, a question I was going to have for you before that beautiful rant, which was good, was what are the silent killers? But I feel like you're starting to answer that for me. So, let me ask in particular, in specific, if I'm like, I'm just a list guy, I just need her to make the list for me and tell, is that a silent killer of my leadership capital?
Oh, yeah, that's a great point. So, I mean, that in itself, anytime you defer to her and say, tell me what you need, or in desperation in a fight, you're like, tell me how to be a husband, or you come to her on the Saturday and you're like, give me the list. There's a tone, there's a way that it could be done. I have asked Natalie for a list within the past 4 months, actually, maybe 6 months. But I actually asked her for a list. But the whole tone, the whole perspective, it's not one based upon ego, but it's one based upon service, leadership as service. But I used to have the perspective was like, tell me what you want. Tell me what you need from me. Well, that puts her in the leadership position, which again is going to kill polarity. It's going to lessen respect. Therefore, it lowers leadership capital. Leadership capital. You don't even care about leadership capital. She's the leader. She's the husband around here. And you're asking her for direction. What's best? What's next for our family? You tell me and I'll do it. So there are many ways that we erode leadership capital. Like there's infinite. There's infinite. It's like saying there's infinite ways to blow money. Like there's infinite ways to blow leadership capital. There's stuff you could do all of a sudden. You go cheat on your wife today. Like you could have been perfectly faithful and honorable and wonderful for 20 years. bro, you just bottomed out. You might have had billions. You might have had an irrelevant amount of leadership capital in the bank at that point. I have an irrelevant amount of leadership capital with Natalie. It's like how much you have. It's irrelevant at this point. It's just it doesn't matter, and I could lose it all today by
Yeah.
going and committing adultery today. So there's some stuff it's like, or if you lose your temper, I always give this example because it's always like the worst thing in the world. So I never want anybody to think like, yeah, sometimes that happens. But I'm like, if you go put a hole in the drywall, like, cause you're mad, if you're that guy, then like, bro, like I've been calm for 6 months and it just wasn't worth like put a hole in the drywall. Like, bro, you just erased your 6 months of savings. Like, you need to understand that. So there's some stuff, the adultery, the anger, the what, like there's some stuff where that harsh word, what harsh word? I don't know, bro. I'm just saying like that harsh word, you can drain your account real quick. I mean, it's like it just got stolen out of there, or it's like you
Yeah.
just pumped it straight into the trash. That stuff is more like that's a guy in crisis. Those are not like those are not typically the guys we're working with or typically the guys we're talking to. Those are guys who are just like, yeah, we could help you, but bro, help yourself a little bit, man. But it's the slow erosion, which is the more typical. It's the stuff that we didn't even know that we were doing. It's when we thought we were doing a good job when I was 22 years old, and Natalie's like shares something femininely and submissively, and I'm like, say it like this, say it like a dude. Didn't know that at the time, so it's like, well, you're killing polarity. Maybe that's not a capital issue so much as it is a polarity issue. It's a bit more of a polarity issue. Taking her out of the feminine, taking me out of the masculine. It's not so much how much capital do I have for standards, boundaries, and instructions. So maybe that one's not perfect. But it ain't helping nothing is the
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And there's just a million things like that. I mean, it's superficial things that matter. How you dress, it's how you work, how you think, how you parent. Are you a man of your word? Do you have integrity? Just it's not one thing, it's everything, Chris.
Yeah, man. Dude, let me bring up an interesting one for you, and hopefully this supports what we're saying. But I'm thinking of my wife comes to me frequently because she's on these Facebook groups with these women in these local groups, right? And those are the worst, literally the worst. Your wife can come up to you, and she can literally be like, I just saw a post about this woman who like basically described your integrity and all the things you do, and like she found out her husband had like a 9-year affair on her. And it's interesting because there are times when my wife can look at me and be like, oh, thank God Chris isn't like that. Then there are other times where I feel her being like, oh my goodness, what if he does look at inappropriate things and he says he doesn't? And what if he is being unfaithful in various different ways? Because all these women thought they could trust their husband. What do you think about that influence on our wives and how that impacts our leadership capital?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, obviously, I don't want to put poison in myself. I don't want her to put poison in herself. I don't want my kids to put poison in. Whatever's coming in our eyes, our ears, those things are influencing us, and they're shaping the way that we think. They can create suspicion where there shouldn't be. They can create all kinds of storylines. Um, there was some movie a few years back that did that, and I remember women posting about it like crazy. Was it Gone Girl? Is that a thing? It
Maybe.
was a Ben
Maybe. I don't
Affleck
know.
movie. I don't remember who the actress was. I
Oh,
don't know if he
okay.
kills her. I don't know. I don't know. I didn't see it, obviously. I don't care. I think it was like some feminist manifesto movie. But it was up there with Woman King and what's the other one I liked?
Okay. Stupid.
Did you see the trailers for Woman King?
No, dude, I didn't see any of this.
There was a movie called Woman King. And I was like, they've jumped the shark. But yeah, but I remember women posting about it afterwards, like me leaving the movie theater and coming home and looking at my husband like all side-eyed stuff. Like I don't even know what happened in the movie. But yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of poison and stuff that we shouldn't allow in our imagination. So yeah, if I'm seeing that pattern in my wife and she's like, "Hey, I was reading this the other day, reading that," I'm like, "Where are you reading this, baby? What are you following? What are you listening to?" And she's like, "Well, I'm in this group." I'm like, "Leave that group." Which is a great point. How much capital do you have, guys, to tell your wife to leave a group? Like, I'm not that controlling. Spoken like a man who doesn't have the capital and wants to cope in the process. Because
Hmm.
that's what I would have said years ago. Or you can just go, you know what? Yeah. I can build to that. But there's a lot of different things that we should guard. Like as a guardian, as a protector, that's one thing I'm looking out for with my wife. And I'm going, if this is a fairly common practice and not an out of the blue exception, then I'm going, all right, I need to lead better here. I need to protect my
Yeah.
girl and help her.
Yeah. Talk to me about the delivery with something like that, right? That particular example, you could say, babe, why don't you leave that group? It doesn't seem like that's serving you. Or there's also that like question of like, hey, I think you'll come to this conclusion if I'm asking you the right questions. Do you think that's a passive way of doing it? Or do you think that's the
That's a
right way
great
of doing it?
point. That's a great point. Because what's interesting about leadership capital is you can you can punch out of your body weight. Is that the right word? Is that the right figure of speech?
You can punch out of your weight class.
Yeah, yeah, you can fight out of your weight class.
By the
You've
way,
only got this much money. You've only got whatever, $100 in leadership capital. With wisdom, you can multiply your leadership capital. I've seen that happen many times. Whereas like, maybe the guy who he's got infinite leadership capital, he can say anything. He can be like, "Hey baby, leave that Facebook group." "Okay, I will." "Baby, I mean it." Like just grab your phone and do it now. "Okay." And she picks up her phone and she does it. Because he had the full capital to accomplish, that protection for his wife and that provision for her. Whereas the guy was like, "I don't have that much capital." Okay, well, you can't say with that kind of clear directness because we can predict that she's going to be like, "Tell me what to do with my Facebook group." So instead, a little bit of flanking, he could accomplish some stuff. Be like, "Baby, none of those local groups have ever served you. And I just think there's a lot of gossip and a lot of suspicion, and I don't like any of it. Cast your vote." Didn't give the instruction, but you planted a seed. We're not cowards, we're wise. Now, if a guy's doing stuff because of cowardly reasons, then I say, stop. We don't do anything because of cowardice.
yeah.
But yeah, there's a wise way to approach things when you don't have the full capital to go, do this, don't do that. And she goes, okay, sure. Why? Why would she do that, by the way? Oh, she knows how loved she is. She knows how trusted she is. She knows how cherished she is. But if she's not sure about some of those things or other factors, feminist, ego, all the things, then yeah, wisdom can actually get us some ground that our cash might not be able to accomplish yet. The Family Captain is all about helping Christian husbands to build an incredible marriage and family culture. It's self-leadership, it's family leadership, it's sex and marriage, all made practical so husbands, wives, and children can enjoy God's best and truly thrive. It's one thing to believe that Christians should have the best marriages and sex lives. It's another thing to know how to make it all happen. But inside our Family Captain Elite coaching program, that's exactly what you're going to learn. In the Family Captain Elite, men are not only equipped with the conviction to act, but also with the wisdom to navigate their exact situations. And they get a clear, practical path to get them the incredible fruit that they're after. So if you want to take your marriage and family culture from just fine to incredible, then go to thefamilycaptain.com and book a free assessment call to see if the Family Captain Elite program really is a good fit for you. That's thefamilycaptain.com. Family leadership is a high calling for your life. So what are you waiting for?
Yeah. That's good. That's helpful from a delivery perspective because, like you said, you can fight out of your weight class is what you said, and
there's like a better
that
figure of speech for
probably
that, but we know what we mean.
That makes sense. That makes sense, and it kind of leads me to thinking about the guy who's like, okay, yeah, like we have a good marriage. Could I hear her say that and say, hey, leave that now? Probably not. Scale of 1 to 10, maybe I could look at my leadership capital in terms of like a 7 in some seasons, a 4 in others. But all in all, if
Or
I'm being
certain
honest,
subjects, even certain
okay,
areas, like you could say jump and she says how high, and then other areas you say, hey, I was thinking maybe, and she goes, rah! So
yeah,
it's really scenario based.
yeah, yeah. So there's the guy who admittedly is inconsistent. His wife sees changes. She responds to the leadership the right way, but she knows it's short lived. He's just swinging back and forth. Nice guy, tough guy, passive one day, the next
Angry,
he's
silent.
trying to figure out the right tactics
Tactics.
as
He's
you
chasing
mentioned.
tactics. Yeah.
So what does that guy do when it comes to really trying to build leadership capital from the ground up in a wise way.
You hit it when you were given the problem. It's consistency. So many guys get so discouraged whenever they're like, I started this and my wife, she's just cynical the whole time. I'm like, and? So what? Well, I tried it and see, you tried it. I think I just heard the problem. You're trying stuff to what? To make her happy. You're not walking out your obedience to Jesus because it pleases the Lord. You're doing things that you think are going to get you quick hits of fruit, which is why she is cynical. She's right, bro. In all fairness to her, she's right. She's right to be cynical. She's right to think this is short lived. You feel the pain point in your marriage and you go, oh, I'm going to fix it. And she's going, part of her is hopeful. I hope he really does. But the rest of her is like, seen it and heard it before. What's the solution? Consistency. Well, she doesn't think I'm ever gonna. What does that have to do with anything? Just win. And by winning, she wins. Just prove her wrong with your loving, consistent faithfulness. But that's where the internal stuff happens. That's the difference, like you said, Chris, between the man who's chasing the tactics because he's like, I want to fix this fruit right now. Hang on, brother. You've neglected this field for years. It's got stones and thorns. We're talking about a difficult case here. It's got stones and thorns in it. And now you're like, I worked on it this weekend. There ought to be a harvest. You're like, you know how things work? You know, you're reaping what you've sown. Good news. You're going to keep reaping what you're sowing. So let's just shift what we're sowing and making a difference with faithfulness. But your self-leadership is the key. That's the thing that she needs to see and feel and go, okay, that's a man of integrity. And like, well, I want to be able to give her an instruction and her like, well, then show her that she's the most cherished woman to ever live. Help her to believe that. Like, she's never going to be the most cherished woman to ever live because Natalie Clark is. So your wife can always be the second most cherished woman.
There you go. We can
but
only
that's,
hope.
hey, that's a target. That's a bullseye. So, like, you've got to continue to show her that you're willing to level you up, not because you're controlling. That's her fear. Don't play into her fears that I think his leadership capital is going to use to just be controlling. No, my leadership capital is used to serve the people that I love with leadership. I want to do what's best for them. Yeah. So the control freak hears examples like telling your wife which Facebook group she can be in and can't be in. The insecure man, the weak man hears that and he goes, that's crazy. Or he's weird and he gets excited about it. But some guys hear that and they're because they're so egotistical, they don't have the capital that I have, but they're so egotistical in their low state, they hear about that and they condemn it because they think that I'm like them. And they think that they know how they would be with that much power, and they think that's how everyone is. It's like the thief thinks everybody steals. It's like the pervert thinks everybody's lusting. Like, it's just like how they see the world. Like the weak man who is very egotistical, even though he denies that he is, he thinks that strong men are like him. And he doesn't understand the massive gap between, their masculinity and their emasculated state. So the best thing you can do is just keep cherishing and loving your wife. It's truly what the scriptures command us. Love your wife. And then we make that practical. Take ownership of outcomes. Bro, level up as a dad. Let her see that. Are you controlling somebody? Yeah, I'm doing a better job with our children. And I'm shepherding them in a more profound way. Like stacking capital, stacking cash, stacking capital. You're planning the date nights. You're looking ahead to the vacation. You're communicating with that person and this thing. And what's she supposed to do? Help. And yeah, it might be awkward transitions where she's been, primary spot in a lot of roles for years. And now you're having to step into that role. It might be some strange shifting of places. It's like trading spots in the shower. You only got one shower head. Like it's a bit now that's actually quite a pleasant exchange because there's some close contact in the water. Not the best example then.
Well, it is cold outside of the water.
It is cold outside of the water. Yeah, so that's a terrible example then, because nobody's going to be cold in this example. Everybody
probably won't make a short out of that. Most likely.
Most likely not. But we'll leave it in the podcast. So that's it. I mean, it's always the same thing. What's the trick? Yeah. What's the tactic? Here it is, guys. Everybody lean in. Become the greatest man that your wife and kids have ever known. Become the man that you are proud of. Love to please your wife, but don't live to please your wife. Live to please the Lord. Well, what if she doesn't? Well, if she doesn't, what? You're going to do what you're going to do because you love the Lord. That's your motive. And yeah, that's going to build tons of capital. It's a rare and strange and deeply, deeply weird and broken woman who does not respond well to the greatest man she's ever known.
Amen. And the key word there is become, because as you're talking about that example of that guy who thinks over the weekend things are going to be fixed, I think we could all very easily use an example of a fat guy who goes to the gym for a month. Men's Health's not going to call you next month and be like, hey, bro, we want you on the cover. It is consistency over time to become that man. Man, those are good examples. So this one's going to sting a little bit for some guys, right? Hey, I have a good marriage. I'm happily married. But
Good.
I want to talk about the guy who he works hard to provide for his family. He's well respected at work, right? Team admires him. CEOs admire him. Public leadership looks good, but private leadership does not. He's I'll call him a fraud from the outside looking in. He doesn't really know he is, but help me understand that guy. How does a lack of integrity from public leadership to private leadership destroy this leadership capital?
Yeah. Well, that's a common scenario. I think a lot of guys thrive where there is more structure. And I think the challenge for that brother is often that there's not the practicals at home. At work, he's got the SOPs. At work, he's got the KPIs. At work, he's got the standards. At work, he's got the team. Like, this thing has been built, or maybe he built it, but still, like, how many business books are there? How many business podcasts are there? How many resources and tools does he have to structure and build something so he knows how to win? So in all fairness to him, obvious, you know how to win at work. And then you come home, you're like, this female creature is so other from me. And I try to please her. I do everything she tells me to do, and it's just never enough. Well, like, he just hasn't heard the truth yet. He just hasn't had the revelation yet that, hey man, it's kind of a sick joke. You actually can't do what she tells you to do. It'll actually make her miserable and you miserable. It'll actually kill polarity. Like, that's crazy. I know, it is crazy. It's insane. Like, it's crazy that all of our dads and all of our uncles and all of our grandfathers and our mothers and our aunts and grandmothers, that everybody just didn't clarify this. But we lost this truth. We're regaining it. It's always been true. But you've got to start bringing some degree of structure and plan and process to household. And it starts with you, and then it goes into the family. So you've got family vision and family culture. At work, you've got spreadsheets and you've got filing cabinets and you've got archives and all this stuff. We don't have to have all of that for household, but we do need just a little bit. A little bit will go a long way for household, where many of us are just going week to week. And even good marriages, like, I love her, she loves me, we love our kids, we're going to heaven when we die. Yeah, we kind of fight sometimes. Yeah, sex is good when it's happening, it's hit and miss, you know how it is. Life's crazy, and we'll just kind of see what next week has in store. Like, that's the guy who, that's who I built the Family Captain for. I built it for me. I built it for me, 10, 12 years ago, where I'm like, I love the Lord. I love my wife. I love my kids. Everything's good. Everything's fine. I know how to win elsewhere. I know how to win in ministry. I know how to win at work. But, like, I want household to be freaking awesome. I want marriage to be freaking awesome. I want marriage bed to be freaking awesome. So I think a lot of times those guys, they just haven't had, not to give them too much of an excuse, they haven't had the how. And I think that can be a barrier. Now, also, I say this other thing about the man who says, I don't know how. I say that's often the cover story for a man who just doesn't want something bad enough. Because I've seen that to be true too. Like, you can't go 50 years and be like, I just never knew how. Like, really, bro? You never figured it out? John Michael didn't know how. I didn't know how, but I didn't let that stay the excuse forever. So, kind of both hand. If the shoe fits, put the thing on.
Yeah. So, JM, this has been super valuable stuff. As we conclude this episode, I want to end it on really understanding this well. And it's, I've got the guy who's happily married. We say, hey, let's have a heaven on earth type of marriage, ecstatically married. But this guy's looking at his leadership capital. He's like, okay, I get it. It's money in the bank. All right. So now I kind of have to determine checking the balance through these various ways and thinking how my day runs. Okay. So let's say a guy's at 5 right now. If he's been there for years, is it true that he's still at a 5, or is his leadership capital just eroding? In other words, is it like I'm either gaining or I'm losing, or is there a middle ground where you just kind of stay there?
Yeah, he could stay put. You could stay put. Because, like we said before, if we look across all the categories of husbanding, whatever, let's make up 12 of them, or fatherhood in general, like you could be getting A pluses in 4 of those. You'd be failing 2. You could be getting a C in a couple. Like there's just multiple combinations of things that influence polarity, how masculine you are, how feminine she is. But then there's also things that influence your ability to say, we're doing this. Your ability to say, this is the standard, this is the direction. Hey, babe, here's what I want, here's what I expect. So it's very possible that you're doing this thing that's eroding leadership capital, but you're doing this thing that's gaining it consistently. Like you're super squared away with that, not so much with that. So yeah, you're always every week the interest builds and you got $25 was added, but every week $25 was deducted because of these 2 things. And yeah, it's very possible that you're just kind of staying put, which is why, and I think that would be the norm for most of those guys who are happily married, because they're like, yeah, things are just kind of the same as they always were, you know. And there really is no monkey wrench, except when we have a new baby. All right, that kind of changes things up a bit, but then we want to go regain our normal, our old normal, which is not awesome, but we'll go regain it. But we're just going to kind of keep doing that. It's just life. Take it a day at a time. We're going to be in church. We're going to love the Lord. We're going to love his saints. We're going to love our kids. We're going to have some sex until the next big monkey wrench. Oh, she's going through perimenopause. Okay, now we have a new thing to get frustrated about. But beyond that, most guys are just kind of coasting, and their leadership capital probably is just average and staying the same.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Yeah, man, that's helpful because I feel like we see things all the time like, hey, think of this question. Would she marry you again? Like, whoa, is that a big enough question? I mean, it should be a yes, right? But at the
Right.
end of the day, are we improving? Are
Yeah, to me,
we
that's like
like,
low bar stuff.
that's
That's
like
like
the
Christians
lowest
who are
bar?
like, hey, bro, we're good. We never say the D word. I'm like, wow. Marriage of the ages. Like, we don't talk about divorce. Is that the standard of victory?
Yeah.
No thanks.
Yeah.
Or would she marry you again? What? Low bar. Yeah. Yeah, she would. Like, we're going for, are you the greatest man she's ever known? Like, is it laughable to her to think about another man? Like, is it laughable to you to think about another man? Like, it is for me. Like, somebody wants to come and sweep Natalie Clark off her feet. Good luck, bro. May the best man win. Good news. It's me. So, like, I'm not worried, but I want everybody to have that kind of clarity, that kind of confidence, that kind of certainty, like high bar, not we're going to go to heaven when we die. Like, that's awesome. That's super good and super sweet. But in the meantime, there's a lot more richness to enjoy for those who want it.
Yeah.
For those who want it. And I know guys listen to this podcast, they do.
Yeah,
They're like,
dude.
man, things are good, things are fine, but whew, next level, brothers.
Yeah, man. Dude, so good. So this has been great stuff, obviously. Guys, the next episode, and listen, real fast, let me backtrack. JM's like, hey, man, become the greatest man your wife and kids have ever known. Hit subscribe, bro. Comment below. Let us know where you're at, where you want to be. What does the greatest man your wife and kids have ever known look like to you? Keep listening to the podcast, all right? Share the podcast. Do all the things to keep
And I have to interrupt
in
Chris.
front of this. Yeah,
I have to interrupt Chris.
go ahead.
When you post in the comments, do not comment about your wife.
Ooh, that's good. Yeah.
Bro, we see it all the time. Like,
Yeah.
hey, how could you level up? How could you this? How could you that? My wife, blah, blah, blah. No, no, not what we asked. Not what we asked. If you need some encouragement, there's a time and a place for all that. But that's not what Chris was just asking. He was asking about where are you? And that doesn't mean where's your wife. It means where are you, brother?
Yeah,
Sorry,
man.
brother. Keep
No,
going.
no, no, no. That's perfect. That's a great disclaimer. So anyway, subscribe to the show. Definitely keep following our episodes. The next episode we are going to focus on is the good to great marriage, or the happily married to ecstatically married. And that's what we're shooting for the next one. So guys, remember, you're either gaining that capital, you're burning it, you're staying the same regardless. Like, your leadership is so, so important. So check that balance, right? Where are you leading well? Where are you running on empty? More importantly, what are you doing about it? But we will keep going, and we'll look forward to the next episode.
Yeah, brothers, go stack some cash. Until next time, captain your ship. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Family Captain Podcast. Now go take some action and serve by leading well. Also subscribe, leave a review so more men can find the podcast and be helped. And if you're ready to take your growth to the next level and you'd like more support, check out thefamilycaptain.com for our resources that'll help you accelerate your journey. And until next time, go captain your ship.